Yeah, so I'm a strategist and an introvert. So I think that I am going to be decoding a little bit of how Jared perhaps got to his level of success from a very, very different angle. So maybe it'll help us all sort of try and replicate some of that. I thought that was extraordinary. Hi. I do have pretty slides, because I like slides. I love design. And this is an invitation, and it really is this conversation about playing big and what does it mean to play big. I normally give big strategic talks. I talk a lot about where the world is going. I talk about trends. I do big PowerPoints for companies to help them understand how to get from here to there. Interestingly, I've never talked about why and what drives me. So this is a really different talk that I'm giving, and a place of really kind of this conversation of why I'm so passionate about what it is that I do and why I think it all really centers around those two words about playing big. There's this phrase that I bumped into at one point, and it's called, "You're playing small doesn't serve the world." Right? That really was the catalyst for me. That was this big, big idea. And it was interesting, we had a little conversation yesterday about what we wanted to do when we were 8. When we were 8, this was an easy question. Like, it was never a question, right? We wanted to be an oceanographer or a tennis star, or last night someone copped to wanting to be a scientist. I thought that was the coolest ever, right? Why do anything that anyone else has ever done? I'm creating something that's never ever been done before. I thought that was, again, incredibly brave and playing super, super big. But interestingly, life is about choices as we get older, and we choose where we want to live, we choose who we want to love, we choose who we want to be, what kind of work we want to do. And whether it's conscious or not, there is actually this conversation we have with ourselves about how big we want to play. At some point, we probably have a dream embedded in every single one of us of wanting to create something or do something, and perhaps we are held hostage by a landlord, and we have to go figure it out. But often, we actually don't have that catalyst, right? It's somehow a calling within us, and we have to get out of our own way. And we often ask ourselves, who are we to be able to go create that? So again, very fortunately, as I was probably going through a moment of that in my life, I bumped into this wonderful essay, story, however you want to describe it. How many folks have probably read this already from Marianne Williamson, but it was pivotal. I'd never seen it before. And so forgive me, I will read it actually from my phone because I don't have it fully memorized, although I'm pretty darn close with it. I have this actually framed in the center of my house, and I bump into it every single day as I get in and out of the shower in my closet. But let me just share it with you if you guys don't mind. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It's our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God, and your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure about you. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. And here's the trick. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our fear, our presence automatically liberates others. Now that was my moment, right? Because now it wasn't about whether or not I played big out of my ego or whether or not I want to be the most important person in the world or that I had some sort of giant drive that somehow was going to stomp over everybody else. It was really, if I don't play big, I am not serving the world. There was this much, much deeper invitation around what that actually meant. Now, if I go back to this kind of thing, this is not actually just a conversation that I have with myself or that I have with my kids or that I have with just my close circle of friends. This is literally what my work is centered on. And I feel super passionate that this is something that I would love to share with everyone because we're in a state of tremendous flux. And as leaders and as individuals, we have tremendous contributions to make to get through it. Right? Big problems to solve and huge opportunities to take advantage of. And the way to get there is to have this kind of catalyst or this kind of drive. Now, how does one actually start to design that, right? Maybe when you're 8, it might be clearer. When you get a little older, it might not be as clear. So we usually start from these two questions. What does the future need and expect from you, right? Things are changing, again, very, very quickly. There is an opportunity to really peg what that is. And then once we have a sense of what those changes are and what the future is actually really begging for, we can then step back and say, what are we in a unique position to create? And this is as an individual, this is as a company, this is as an organization, this is as a city, honestly, as we're seeing as we all are visiting here. We all have something unique that we can contribute by our size, our experience, our connections, our passions. None of us are the same, and we all have something different we can bring to it. Now I'm going to step back and put on sort of my strategist hat and say, again, this is critical because we're in a place of tremendous change. There's a futurist named Mary O'Hara Devereux will describe this as the fact that every 75 years we transition from one economic era to another. She's been studying this since the Middle Ages, even before then, and believes that we're actually in one of the largest moments of transition ever. right? Old systems are breaking down, and new systems are yet to be created. And we're in this moment of tremendous uncertainty and ambiguity and possibility, but also letting go. That is not always an easy place to be. Now again, this is affecting every single industry, from publishing and music and automotive education, healthcare. There's not one business that is not affected by this, and I would argue there's not one individual that is not affected by this, right? We're rethinking marriage, we're rethinking family, we're rethinking everything. Nothing is static, everything is up right now for redesign as we start to think about, again, what the future needs and expects from us. Now again, my work is often with big brands, right? And as I explain to them, brand survival is not guaranteed. You may have had a really great idea 125 years ago. It doesn't matter. There is nothing that says that you get to still have permission to continue playing unless somehow you do it with a real sense of possibility and intent, right? We know a lot of those brands that didn't make it across the other side. We know a lot of those brands that are stuck right in the middle. BlackBerry. I'm desperate to get my hands on BlackBerry. I see a big idea for them, and they just don't see it. But there are brands that have made it to the other side, right? So we started looking at all those brands and whether or not they're, Apple, Google, whatever. Some of those are famous names. Some of those had to transition from one side to the other, like Ford or Wendy's. Some of them had the opportunity to kind of just start from the other side, right? Got to create with that intent in mind. But we didn't just look at them and celebrate them and go, yay, those are great case studies. We started thinking about what it is that actually drives that success. And what I would argue is it's constant innovation, right? Constant creation. Well, what drives that? Creation is actually a very scary place to be, right? To be constantly in a place of reinvention, right? There's a lot of risk that goes with that. There's potential failure that goes with that. There's a humility that goes with that. There's a need to collaborate with others that often goes with that. Why are people somehow inspired to be in that place of constant innovation and, again, a place of letting go of something that might not have worked in the past and willing to embrace something that's new that has a risk associated with it? And I started thinking about that and thought, well, you know what? One way to describe the shift that we're in terms of this economic era, right? Some people describe it as moving from an analog age to a digital age. Some people will talk about that we're in a social age. There's lots of labels you can put on that big shift. But I had this moment of sort of clarity one day that for me, it's really about the fact that we are moving from an economy and a culture and a society of extraction to one of contribution. As we just heard in this talk, right? When someone was living in that place of extraction, it actually didn't feel so great. Right? You kind of realize that there's actually not an authenticity there. And really, extraction for me is about how much you can hold on to, how many resources you can somehow harness, how much energy you can sort of extract from everyone else, how much value you can control. I see it with businesses over and over and over again. And the invitation we give to them is to think about it through the lens of contribution. What can you, it's the same exact widget, right? You can make the exact same frozen meal, you can make the exact same tire, you can make the exact same piece of software, but the intent that you bring behind it changes everything. And when you're in a place of contribution, you have so much more courage because now you're not just doing it based on your own value, your own extraction, right, and what it is that you get to get from it, but you get to now realize that you're actually serving and giving something huge back to the world. Does that feel right? Now, it's easy to come up here and sort of pontificate about that, which is super fun. But I'll give you an example from the real world. This did happen, and I'll tell you first a corporate example, and then I'll tell you a personal example. The corporate one's easier to talk about. This is about a big, huge food company that every single one of you have purchased a product from somewhere in the past, and probably then stopped purchasing a product from sometime in the most recent future because you somehow didn't trust the integrity of the food. There was something about it that wasn't really quite right for you. And they were worried about whether their business was going down and wanted to understand how to get people to buy more of their product. Spent a lot of time chatting with them about all kinds of things, interviewed all the senior stakeholders and senior leaders who were all, by the way, really good people, right? And tried to figure out why they'd made really poor choices in denigrating the quality of their products over those last 10 years. And this was sort of the list, right? They were operating on the left-hand side from these set of expectations. They needed to be consistent and they needed to be sure. They researched the heck out of everything. They needed to be autonomous because they're a big, huge, strong company. They needed to be thorough. They needed to be definitive leaders, make sure they were really clear. They had to be authoritative. They had a really strong process that they were super proud of. And at the end of the day, it was all driving toward the idea of being able to consistently drive a transaction, right? It was over and over again. We can guarantee that we're going to drive this transaction. It was an extraction sort of methodology until it didn't work. So in the food world, we've explained to them that actually there's a whole different set of operating principles. And what the future needs and expects from you is actually quite different. It's about asking you to be responsive. Right? If I need gluten-free products, please don't tell me it's going to take 5 years to make gluten-free products. I actually would love to have them now. Right? We need you to be nimble. We still want you to be leaders, but we want you to be dynamic, adaptive leaders. We want you to have a sense of not just process, but purpose, and not just authority, but belief. There's a whole different kind of operating system that when you're in a place of contribution, it opens up for you. And that leads then to trust. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't get the transaction, right? But don't you want to buy the brands that you trust and that you love, not just the ones that are trying to sell you something? So again, this is the exact same line of products, but done through this lens, it opened up a completely different opportunity for them to start to get to the courage to change their products, to upgrade their products, to lead their retailers, to change the vocabulary on their campus, to build different buildings on their campus, to treat the employees as partners, and open up this whole conversation around trust and co-collaboration on the campus. It was really quite phenomenal to see. So I felt like, okay, at least it works for companies, right? And it does work with leaders. I work with often big CEOs and CMOs and those kinds of folks who also have to get to that place of recognizing that even just because they stepped into that big, huge spotlight doesn't mean their work is done. If anything, it requires more courage than ever to really sort of take those leaps. But last December, I was actually at an event that was put on by another thought leader group. And I got to watch some of the most extraordinary speakers in the world talk about where the world is going, the future is. And I remember looking at the stage thinking, gosh, like, what does it take to get there? You know, like, I would love to be one of those folks. Like, what does it take? And I had my own epiphany. I'm like, oh, I'm an extractor. I'm not a contributor. I take this knowledge from all of you, right, that I'm able to often run into as speakers or in various communities that I'm a part of, and I take all that and I repackage it and I bring it to my clients and say, hey, here's how to go. But I don't give any content back to the world. I haven't written a book. I don't write a blog. I barely tweet. Like, I keep it all here. And I thought, that is actually not so great. And I would argue that the reason I hadn't done any of those things before is because I felt a little shy. Right? Like, who really wants to hear from me? Like, I'm proud of the work that I do, and I'm really excited about these stories that we get to tell, but I was kind of a little bit on the, sort of feeling like I was extracting attention from people and not realizing actually that I could contribute a great deal by being able to share some of these stories that we have been able to learn and bump into. So I haven't done it yet, but at some point I will start a blog, and I will tweet a little bit more generously because I realize that part of it is I also want to be part of the contributing economy, not just the extraction economy. And this is something I'm actually teaching my children a great deal about too. So let's just sort of step back again for a second and sort of look at this place of playing big. A lot of people have had conversations with me, well, what does it mean? Like, play big means that you have to have this giant footprint and you have to be the biggest brand ever and you have to sell out. It's actually not any of that. For me, playing big is a simple set of a few little mindset or principles. And I kind of boiled it down the other day, actually just for you guys. It is about contribution. It really starts with contribution. And then once you have this idea of what you want to contribute, it's about commitment, right? It doesn't always just fall in your lap. It's about somehow following through. One of the things we have to teach clients and big corporations is just because you started an initiative and it didn't work out at the very beginning and then you kind of gave up on it, it doesn't really count, right? You got to see it through, and you have to be congruent with what it is that you do and really show through all of the various programs and initiatives and aspects of what it is that you create. This can't just sort of be a one-shot deal. You really have to commit. The good news is you don't have to do it alone. Right? It's all about collaboration. It's about moving to that place of humility and realizing that you are not the only people who probably have that answer. And what's actually awesome, again, is when you move from extraction, where you feel like everyone's a competitor, and you move to contribution, everyone becomes a collaborator. It's a very, very different model, right? When I'm on a mission to go do something, whether it's to improve the health and nutrition of the planet, or whether it's that I want to revitalize a downtown area, or I want to in any way somehow make a really big difference, I realize there's a lot of other people who probably share that same thing, and wouldn't it be extraordinary if we could figure out a way to share our energies. And the last is courage. It isn't just a mind game when you go and do this kind of thing. There really is a soulful piece that comes to it, and often the biggest enemy is ourselves. We, again, sometimes go into that space of, what would be the risk if I did this? So you can think about that in your own journeys, right? The whole personal journey of what it takes to kind of get out of your own way. And you can also think about it as a leader, what it takes to go into that space. And the bigger the organization that you are a part of, probably the bigger the risk is, the more visible all that is, the more people have held you in esteem because you did something the old way really well, and you now have to abandon that set of principles and that way of doing things to take on something much bigger. Take some courage. But again, my hypothesis here is that when you do it out of a place of contribution, it really is the thrust to make that possible. It is no longer whether or not you are just, kind of have that little vision by yourself. This is about the fact that if you don't play big, you are not serving the world. And the cool part, again, is I went back and I reread this over and over again in preparing for this talk, and I read that bottom line again, too, that it's not just available to some of us, it is available to every single one of us. Every single one of us has some sort of, I would even argue, not just opportunity, but a responsibility to get to that space of playing big and realizing that you have a contribution to make that's much, much more richer than you probably gave yourself permission to believe. So with that, yeah, we'll just read that a little bit again, right? And the other part that I think, again, is extraordinary is as you are liberated from your own fear, you give then people, again, incentive to be able to, and inspiration to be liberated from theirs. It is a chain reaction. And that's a part, again, I think that's so amazing. And that's why we do want to get out there and tell these stories more, because I do think that they help all of us realize that this is possible. So with that, I just say play big, and thank you.